In 1958, Congress passed a law that taking the fleet commands away from the Chief of Naval Operations and putting them under the Joint Chiefs of Staff as an organization. So, and under the Secretary of Defense. So that I could no longer give orders like I did in Lebanon to say land, and they landed. Since then, there's been a struggle to get centralized, first to get one military man, then to get one civilian, one man to get in control of all the military. As soon as you do that, you centralize authority, and eventually you'll have a man in there that either abuses his authority or doesn't know how to use it.
When Kennedy became president in 1961, he further centralized civilian control over the military by appointing a very strong Secretary of Defense, Robert F. McNamara. McNamara took complete control of the American defense establishment, from directing field operations in Vietnam to choosing which new airplane to build for the carrier fleet. Like many civilians who'd controlled military purse strings since the beginning of the century, his main criteria was cost effectiveness. What was the cheapest workable solution?
There was a strong civilian leadership at that time. They were all smart fellows, and they tried to pay attention to the tactics and our fighting, how to do it strategically and tactically and so forth. But always it was decided on the basis of which was the cheaper way to go.
Cost effectiveness and control became the central issues in a struggle between Secretary McNamara and the Navy, which occurred at the height of the Vietnam War. The conflict directly involved Admiral Connelly, then Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, and it shows how serious the differences between military and civilian authorities had become. It centered around the F-111, a new supersonic fighter-bomber that Secretary McNamara said could save money by serving both the Navy and the Air Force. But both services felt the plane was inadequate, although the chain of command made it difficult for those directly involved to tell McNamara what they thought. This conflict came to a head at a hearing of the Senate Armed Services Committee after billions of dollars had been spent on the plane. Among those present at the hearing was Admiral Connelly, who'd flown the F-111 himself.
Well, we went up to the Senate Armed Services Committee, to John Stennis, chairman. Guys like Barry Goldwater and Howard Cannon and Harry Byrd were on the committee. And this was a showdown on whether more money would go into the F-111B, which is the designator for the Navy, or not. And it wasn't easy for me. I went up there, and my Chief of Naval Operations was my classmate, Tom Moore. Secretary of the Navy was Paul Ignatius. The R&D Assistant Secretary was Bob Frosch. I knew that Bob Frosch knew the damn thing wasn't worth the doing. Moore and I both knew that it wasn't worth another dime for the Navy. But Ignatius was secretary, and he was answerable directly to McNamara. And so it wasn't a very nice session. And we went up there at 10 o'clock in the morning, we testified, Mr. Ignatius testified until noon. Then we reconvened about 1:30, and Mr. Ignatius testified until 5 o'clock. Finally, Senator Stennis went out of the room when I came back, and he said, "This question is for Admiral Connelly." First time I'd answered a question in 6 or 7 hours, or more, or any others. He said, "Would you put more money into this airplane to carry the engines further, and would it make to make it better?" I said, "No, sir, I would not." "Why wouldn't you?" I said, "Because it's not the right airplane." I gave the story I've already told you. But Mr. Stennis said, well, what about more powerful engines? And that would make it perform better, would it not? And maybe I was exhausted or exasperated by that time, and I said, Senator Stennis, there's not enough thrust in all Christendom to make a fighter out of this airplane, and that was the end of that. And I can tell you, riding home in the limousine with Mr. I thought I was going to get canned, but I was protected. Senator Stennis somehow or another protected me.
Admiral Connelly's testimony settled the issue. Eventually, the F-111 did join the U.S. military inventory, but as an Air Force bomber. And the Navy bought no F-111s. Instead, it used the best parts of F-111 technology in the F-14, an airplane that is now the mainstay of America's carrier aircraft. They nicknamed it Tomcat, after Admiral Tom Connelly.